All right, so today we're just going to expand on arrays. We are going to talk about what happens when you and how do you send an array to a method. Now, we spent the last unit on methods. We are going to be continuing to use methods using forward. They are essential for organizing your code, and oftentimes you will want to be sending arrays to methods. Now, over here, let me zoom in a little bit. I have an integer array. It is size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It holds elements 15, 18, 4, 10, and 19. Um, and I have a method whose purpose is to accept an array as a parameter and sum up all of the values inside of an array and send that back. So what I would like to do is say the sum of the numbers in this array is call upon my method sum, which is down here, and then I am going to send my array down to the method. It's going to calculate the average of that array, and then it's going to send it back, and I'm going, not the average, it's going to calculate the sum of that array, and then it's going to send it back, and we're just going to plop that out to the screen. And the sum is 66. Now, how does that work? Well, when you create a method public static int sum, public static is always there. It is returning an integer, which is going to be the sum of the array. And inside of the parameters, you need to specify, no, I'm not just accepting any integer, I'm accepting an array of integers, a whole list of integers. So when you specify that parameter, you need to make sure that your data type has those 2 square brackets next to it, because remember, that's what tells Java, this is not just any integer, this is an array that is capable of holding integers. So the main thing is that when you send an array down to a method, you specify its data type using those square brackets. And then inside of this method should be nothing too crazy. I have my sum variable, which I create, and then I have a for loop, which will move through the contents of the array, which I should really be using numbers.length. It's going to add up all those numbers, and it's going to return it back, giving us this program right here. So nothing too crazy, right? You send down an array, make sure you specify, and then you can do whatever you want with that array. Now, the only part of today which is going to be confusing is the following, and I will do my best to explain it clearly. If you guys remember from the previous unit on methods, the variables that you work with in your method and the variables that you work with in your main are 2 separate things. For example, if I have a variable called num and it is equal to 1, what I might do is send this variable down to the method if I wanted to use it there. Now, if I wanted to send num down to the method, I would have to accept that as an extra parameter, which I will do. Now, remember, you can call it whatever you want down here, right? I could call it variable, I could call it my number, I could even call it num. But what's important to remember is even if, let me just, so this is going down here. Even if I call it the exact same variable name, this is a different variable that happens to hold the same value, which is 1. And that means the following. If I take, let's get rid of all this. I don't even want this anymore. Let's get rid of all this. If I take num and I make it equal to num plus 1, and then I print it out, I will be printing out the number 2. This has nothing to do with this num variable, which is up here. Again, they are 2 different variables. They just happen to have the same number. They just happen to have the same variable name. And that can be confusing. That's why I like to take the parameter and make it a slightly different variable name, just to make it clear, hey, this is different than num. I'm just taking that value that's inside of num and I'm placing it inside of this new variable, right? Because if I want to print out, let's make this void because we got rid of the return statement. Okay, I'm really messing up my code here. Give me a second. So I'm going to print out my number is num, and I'm going to call upon the array right here. Okay, ignore everything to do with the array. That's pointless for my example right now. What I am trying to show you is that I created a variable called num. I send that variable to my method, where I put it inside of a new variable, alter it, print it out. It's 2 here. I then come back up to my main method and I print out my original variable. That variable is still 1. This is just me excessively over-explaining the point that when you send a variable down to a method, it does not change the original variable. This stayed at 1 up here. You created a new variable and changed that to 2. And it might seem that I'm over-explaining this, but there's a purpose. This rule does not apply for arrays. If I send an array down to a method and I alter that array, similarly to how I did with this num, it will change the original array, which is the opposite of what happens with normal variables. And there is a reason for this. The reason is that an array is not like a normal variable. An array is what we call an object. And I'm going to really explain why this is the way it is in grade 12. But for now, all that you need to know is that, such as in this example right here, if I send an array down to a method, it will alter the original array. Let's take a look. I declare an array called numbers. It is size 10. This array is empty. It's all zeros. Now, I am sending the numbers array down to this method called fillArray. This method uses a scanner to take the array at spot I and fill it with the user input. Now, again, notice that this array up here was called numbers. And when I sent this array down, I called it something different. I called it array. Doesn't matter. When I alter it in the method, it will change the numbers array too. So when I go into this method and I create a for loop that allows the user to input numbers into this array that we call array, it will also be inputting numbers into the numbers array that we declared originally. Think about it, if it makes it any easier, like you created 2 names for the same array. Right? We originally called this array. Will this fix my problem? No, it won't. 1 second. We originally created an array called numbers, which refers to a list of numbers which we have yet to fill. So they're all zeros. And then we sent it to a method and said, hey, this exact same array is called array. And then what happened here was we replaced these numbers with the user input. But our original numbers array is also changing. That's what I'm trying to explain. Okay. So let's actually run it so you can see. Just a note, after I call upon the fillArray method to fill in this array, I am then printing out the array with this for loop right here, which again should go to numbers.length. So let's run it. Okay, input number and index 0. I'm just going to input random numbers. Okay, so as you can see, the original array called numbers has all of these values that I inputted, even though I inputted these values and manipulated the array within my method. So to summarize, when you send a variable down to a method and make changes to that variable, it does not change the original variable. When you send an array down to a method and alter that array, it does change the original array. Oftentimes, this is a piece of information that you will not need to make your code work, but when you do come into an issue, it's important to know that this might be why it's happening and you need to work around it. So please let me know if you have any questions and make sure that you're doing the homework.